So, hi everyone, good morning. Bom dia a todas e todos. É um prazer, it's a pleasure to receive you here at NeuroMat, the Research Innovation and Dissemination Center for Neuromathematics, for our 8th edition of the Wikidata Lab. These events were developed as a space for thinking, developing, and experimenting this, I would say, new Wikimedia, well, newish Wikimedia project, Wikidata, and understanding how this project can actually be integrated onto our other activities on Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons, and other projects that we've worked, but mostly here, Wikipedia and Wikimedia Commons. This is a special event. It's an intensive Wikidata Lab. The other ones are generally one day long. They start in the morning with a theoretical presentation, and during the afternoon we go for a hands-on practice activity. You'll have the same structure, but now in 2 days, and with special guests. So today we are very happy to have with us Andrew Lee. Tomorrow we will have Magnus Mansk. Andrew is currently, he was telling me, a consulting for the Wikimedia movement in general, I would say, but also Wikimedia DC in Washington. He's worked both theoretically and practically with the projects. He's the author of the book. I should actually have asked you to autograph my edition, The Wikipedia Revolution, which to some extent brought me to the project a while ago. But now he's definitely very involved in establishing partnership with cultural institutions and other kinds of institutions like universities and everything. And today he'll present for us something that at first I didn't really understand, but I trusted him, which is called ontologies for modeling and fixing models on Wikidata or databases in general. So I won't take up more of your time, and I'll just pass it to Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really glad to be here today. And I know how tough it is to listen to something more advanced like this in a tongue that's not your native tongue. So please, anytime you have any questions, or if I'm going too quickly, feel free to raise your hand and stop me. I know that even for native English speakers, I speak way too quickly. So I try to slow down everything when we're talking about Wikidata, because there's so many new concepts and ways to get lost in some of the things we're talking about. So feel free to tell me to pause or ask any questions in the meantime. So I really want to congratulate you folks, because I think you folks are going to be the first ones to really get this deep of a level of training on Wikidata. This is even going beyond kind of the third level of training that we do in Washington, D.C. So I work a lot with museums and libraries and GLAM institutions on Wikidata. And, our first training is just basically, what is Wikidata? Why are we doing Wikidata? The second one is more of a hands-on in working a little bit with items, thinking about how to model things. And the third set of workshops we had in Washington, D.C. with the Smithsonian Museum and the National Archives and Library of Congress. Those are kind of our big three GLAM institutions in the United States and in D.C. We worked on some of the things we're talking about here, but we're going on even beyond that, because that session we had was only about 2-3 hours. We have time to talk about this and then act on it in the afternoon. So I'm really excited to have some time to work with you to explore some of these questions that we could only start to ask when we did the training with Smithsonian, but now we can actually come up with some results. And actually, one of the 2 challenges I'm going to give you for the afternoon will directly help us in a new project that we're starting with the Smithsonian on how do we think about the depicts property. So even for American English speakers, depicts is not really a word you use every day, but basically what is represented in a painting. And how do we meaningfully add content to Wikidata that gives not only art historians, but the general public really useful metadata to search, to sift, to categorize what is in Wikidata in terms of paintings and photographs and visual works. So I'm really interested in your feedback and some of your ideas on how do we really improve this aspect of Wikidata, which really is not very good right now. So if you are a user of an iPhone or any kind of mobile phone that can interpret QR codes, you can actually load up my presentation while I'm going along. You can see some of the more details of what's going on there. But if you have a new iPhone, you point your camera at that QR code, and now you can visit the website. So I think this is kind of the revival of QR codes and maybe QRpedia in our everyday lives, because it's much easier to visit web content now that you have these QR codes everywhere. We're walking around the campus the other day with the snakes and everything, so there's QR codes everywhere here on campus as well. All right, so this is us, and you'll be hearing from, you couldn't find a better person on Sunday to talk about how to work with Wikidata in large amounts. So Magnus is not only the expert, he's the tool writer and the guy if you want new features. I'm not going to say that any feature you ask, he'll do it, but there's a very good chance he'll do it if you say, how come I can't do X? And you can see Magnus is hiding right now. This is the guy, and you have him in this room with you. So as I mentioned, these are the kind of the big three organizations we work with: Library of Congress. It's strangely enough, in the United States, we don't have a national library. It's kind of weird. So the Library of Congress, which serves Congress, is kind of our national library. We have the National Archives, that I've been working with quite a bit, and then the Smithsonian, which is kind of a gigantic network of museums in the United States, and in DC at least, they're all free. So today we're going to talk about browsing and exploring ontologies, and I'm really glad to see that most of you are pretty well versed in Wikidata and kind of know the tools. And we're going to talk about how do we model things in Wikidata, and a lot of the challenges I'm going to give you are recognizing that we ideally should be doing this. We are falling quite short of that in Wikidata, and you can be part of the solution in finding best ways to improve that in Wikidata. And some of the examples that I'll talk about are the project Women in Red, which is a project that tries to close the gender gap. So most of you probably know, depending on what era you look at, the biographies of women in Wikipedia fall far short in quantity and quality of what you see with men in Wikipedia. And then the project Sum of All Paintings, which is probably the most active and most well thought out project in Wikidata. And then one example of how I took some of the lessons that we'll be talking about today and applied it to the area of firearms in Wikidata. So how did we fix some of the models related to guns and ammunition and bullets and military history type of topics there. And then the afternoon, we're going to give you the challenge of choosing one of these two areas to work with. As I mentioned before, the depicts property. How do we describe what's in an artwork? And number two, if you're interested in this, this is another question that came up recently when we were talking to libraries and museums, and it's kind of imperfectly modeled. If you look at a library in Wikidata, are they part of a university, or is the university the parent organization? And we found that it's kind of all over the map here, and there's no clear answer as to what's the better way to do things, but we can help solve some of this today. And I know that Joao is a big fan of solving things in 3 to 4 hours, and hopefully we can do some of that. So I know that this might be, you're probably working with Wikidata in Portuguese more than English, so I thought I'd just do my kind of 5-minute recap. Even when we're doing the 3rd or 4th session with folks in Washington, D.C., I like to at least take 5 minutes to make sure, even if people don't know anything about Wikidata or know a lot about Wikidata, you might not be familiar with some of the terminology I use. Some people say statements, some people say claims, some people say items. So this is just some of the vocabulary that I use. I like to also talk about Wikidata as the evolution of the Wiki movement into the ultimate free linked open database. Not all Wikipedians and Wikimedians believe in this. Ideally, this is the case. I think it is definitely going to be the case. It just may take more time, given some of the folks who take longer to come to this realization. So part of the challenge here that we'd like to describe to outsiders, and this might be useful as you talk about Wikidata to your departments, colleagues, or folks who don't have the same kind of training, I like to say that part of our mission is to convert the encyclopedia text, right, what we read as kind of free-form text, into structured statements, and to turn human readable into machine understandable. And also a big part of Wikidata, which gets a lot of librarians and museum folks excited, is just simply linking to their external identifiers, right? So that Wikidata today is the most complete hub of pointers to all these databases on the net. So that's really important to understand that, and GLAM individuals really like this idea of Wikidata being this pointer, like this octopus pointing to all these different databases out there. And then a lot of folks in the GLAM world have been hearing about semantic web for years and years and years as this kind of abstract concept that Tim Berners-Lee back in the 90s even said, this is the dream of the web, is so that you don't have to depend on text labels and everything, and we'll have meaning on the web. And people are kind of like, that sounds good, but what's the real implementation of this? And when people see Wikidata, they finally say, ah, that's what the semantic web is about, that you can have an entity or an item, and I know it in Portuguese as this, and someone knows it in English as that, and someone knows it in Spanish as another label, and then we now have much better content on the web. So I like to describe, I sometimes use the word triple, sometimes I don't use the word triple, but you all know that Wikidata now has 3-part statements that we work with. And I usually like to say that the Q numbers are things that anyone can produce and create. You can go to Wikidata and hit create a new Q item. So these are just things that anyone can create. And those numbers are probably pretty familiar to you there. Q1, Q2, Q835960, which is where we are now. And then the P numbers are much more a controlled vocabulary, right? So you'll see that phrase used a lot on Wikidata or any kind of database system, so that we really want to make sure P numbers don't just get created overnight. We really want to think about it and how that P number or that property fits with the other properties in Wikidata. And then the special types of P numbers are identifiers, right? The pointers to other databases out there on the net, right? So just Q numbers, P numbers, this should be pretty familiar to all of you. And then just examples of how this is represented in the database. And I'd like to say that the database just knows Q23, P31, Q5, and then we put the labels on top to give it meaning to us in our language, right? But the underlying database just holds these triples underneath the surface. A lot of people don't know that you can actually access Wikidata from the Wikipedia page. This is a surprise to a lot of folks that we do training on, because I think if you do studies on where people look on the web page, this is the last place that anyone ever looks on a web page. So it's kind of hidden in the lower left-hand corner. But I like to point this out to a lot of folks that, yes, you can get to the Q item very quickly, but you may not have noticed that's in this gigantic list of things on the left-hand side of the page, right? So you all seen a Wikidata item before, knowing the title, the property, and the value, right? And then we have the description right there, and then the aliases or other things that it's known by. We just discovered today, it happened a while back, but we just discovered today that one of the most popular items in English Wikipedia, cat, Q146, was changed to house cat and not just cat, which made it hard for me to find today. So the nice thing about having aliases is that I know it as cat. Even if you change the label, I can find it through the aliases that are there. All right, so editing Wikidata. This is a little bit confusing to a lot of folks when we first start training on Wikidata. They're used to seeing one big edit button at the top, and then they're kind of surprised that there's edit buttons everywhere on the page, right? So it can get a little bit dizzying when you first do Wikidata editing. And then identifiers, as kind of an exhaustive list of things that you can point out to on the internet. Some people are surprised at how many identifiers we have in Wikidata. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the tools here. I think you folks have used quick statements already or have looked at it. Good. Magnus here is the guy who created quick statements. So new features. He already is starting a new feature list for that. How many people here have used Google Spreadsheet with the Wikidata tools for Google Spreadsheets? Anyone? Some of you. Okay, good. So we're going to show that to you today. A really nice tool. And what we like to say is that quick statements is great for hundreds or even thousands of rows. You edit an individual item on Wikidata, but how about that space in between? If you're working on 15, 20, 50, 100 items, what are some good tools to work with a smaller set? And I think that Google Spreadsheets is a good tool just for that. And then we will try to show you some examples of how that works. I forgot to show you the Wikidata in one page. Let me show you that. So one of the things I think has been useful in our training is this one-page guide to Wikidata. And if you look at the slide deck, you will see that we have created this. So one of the great things about Wikidata is that there's so many tools that you can use. One of the problems with Wikidata is there are so many tools you can use and you don't know where to start. So we created this one-page guide to Wikidata that I think is very useful in training, saying these are the most significant tools you should pay attention to if you want to do bulk editing, if you want to display items, if you want to do queries, right? And so far this page has been translated into 4 languages, and I welcome you to try to translate into Portuguese if it makes sense. But I think this has been really useful to folks who are first learning Wikidata, and they look at help pages, and they look at the tools pages, and they're not sure where to start. And this is a good overview of what you should be looking at. So oftentimes when I do training, I'll print out 50 or so of these and hand them out so people can see these. So definitely take a look at the Wikidata in one page if you can. One of the most important things to understand Wikidata is instances versus subclasses, and even folks who are veterans of Wikidata and understand this very well still debate this all the time in our forums, right? So I think the easiest way to understand this is with something like the human brain, right? A brain is a subclass of a human organ in your body. The human brain is a subclass of brain, but then when you talk about instances of brains, we are talking about something like Einstein's brain. So actually, believe it or not, Einstein's brain has an entry in Wikidata, and you probably know that it's probably well, I think it's been sliced up by now, but it's in a jar and it's in preserved material. So there's only one other instance of a human brain in Wikidata. Does anyone know what that is? So Einstein is pretty famous as the guy who has a brain in Wikidata. Anyone else know if you search for instance of brain, of human brain in Wikidata, one other one comes up? Any guesses? Or does anyone know how to do the query really fast? Magnus Mask. we don't want to put it in a jar yet. We still need that brain for producing more tools. But if you do that search real quick, you'll come up with Charles Babbage. Does anyone know who Charles Babbage is? Kind of like the father of computer science and mathematics. So like the Babbage engine was one of the first computers out there. So he's the only other person that has an instance of brain. Doesn't mean that he's the only one who deserves that. You might have other brains that are there. But it kind of shows you the difference between something that is generically modeled and then a particular instance of something, right? So this gets to ontologies. It's a very fancy word for just describing the formal definition and naming of types, properties, and relationships of the entities that exist in a domain. And I think it's fair to say that Wikidata is probably the most ambitious human endeavor yet, because you're already having a tough time modeling artworks or modeling cars or firearms in just those specific fields of study. Now think about putting them all together in one pile and saying that the way that you model firearms has to be harmonious with paintings and has to be harmonious with cars and fields and all these other fields of study. That's really hard. We're not even sure it's possible, but it's kind of fun to think that we have this universal ideal of modeling everything in a way that's compatible with each other. So that's kind of the challenge, is that now that Wikidata has been around for a few years and we have lots of people who understand Wikidata at its technical level, now on a conceptual level, what can we do to kind of harmoniously bring together all these different ways of looking at these fields of study? Right. So the challenges that we're going to kind of approach to address today is how are things modeled in Wikidata? What properties do I set when adding an item? This is always the big thing. Like, I think that this is missing in Wikidata, but when I add it, what properties do I set, right? And we already know that for certain types of items, there are properties that are relevant to this, but not relevant to that. And it's kind of hard sometimes to see what we call, say, the 10,000-foot view. How do we see all the ways that things are modeled? And then how do I make multiple items in a set consistent? So we're going to show you some of those tools that can do that. So these are some of my favorite tools for exploring ontologies in Wikidata. So we're going to show you some of these. How many people here have used Squid before? SQID? Some of you did. And Magnus, you created Reasonator, right? So Magnus here, how many people have seen Reasonator before? So maybe we should just show you that in the first place, because Reasonator is kind of interesting just to show you that. So Reasonator, which you're going to show it more tomorrow as well, or not really? Okay. So it's worth showing you this. And it's kind of an interesting tool that just tries to take what it finds in a Wikidata item and tries to put it out in a human readable form. So if I go in here and let's say Mahatma Gandhi right there, it's going to show you something that kind of looks like a starter Wikipedia article, but it's all generated through an algorithm that looks at the Wikidata item and looks at things like where he was born, when he was born, and writes something like that, right? So it's not art, certainly, in terms of the text that's there, especially this one. Mahatma Gandhi was a British Raj Dominion of India politician, barrister, political writer, journalist, philosopher. So no human being would ever list like 12 things in a row like that. But he did so many things in his lifetime. That's all the things that were listed in his Wikidata item. But you can see that if you look down here, these are English language sentences you can write just based on the data that's in Wikidata. Right? So this is what Reasonator tries to do, is make a human readable version of the item. And I think Magnus put it in his description as Wikidata in a pretty form, and something that looks like what humans would read. But then Squid goes one level deeper, right? So if you go in here and you say Wikidata Squid, and I'll show you some more examples of this in a second, which is like Reasonator, but then it even goes a little bit further in allowing you to explore all the connections from that item to subclasses and to superclasses and all these other things. So it tries to give you kind of the model up and the model down as to where this item sits in the model that you find in Wikidata. So it's doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So you'll see that little blue bar at the top move across as it processes more and more stuff. I'm not sure how many queries just loading up this page generates, but it's lots. So it's going back there, doing Wikidata queries, trying to find out, all the connections that it has to other things. So you can see that already it not only lists spouse, father, sibling, child, but it also grabs like descriptions from them to give you more context that's there. Wow, did he really have 20 children? I guess it's possible. So you can see that the children, that's a lot. So you can see some of the children are more complete than others. Some is just, there's a Wikidata item that's there. Sometimes that child was notable in his or her own right, and that's been built out and has a description, right? So you probably know by now Wikidata has a much lower threshold for notability than Wikipedia. So sometimes an item there, like one of Bach's children, is just created with just one statement, instance of human. That's it. No Wikipedia article will ever be written about some of these children, but Wikidata items can be created because they serve a functional need within or structural need within Wikidata. So other things that are interesting here is if you click over to From Related Entities, you can see now you can explore more things here, right? What kind of statements does it use here, and how are they used? Then the media, all kinds of things that are right there. Let's see if I can show you the other one here.
Just for completeness sake,
yes.
From related items is also in Reasonator.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, so Reasonator has, it looks very similar to Reasonator, but this one actually has a framework where I think you can actually write extensions to Squid and do all kinds of cool things with this. So just be aware of some of these tools here that allow you to kind of explore the hierarchy that you see there. Let me see if I can go back up here and show that. Human relationships, good. Statements, good. Okay, so let's go back here. And then Wikidata Graph Builder is a way to kind of show in a two-dimensional way relationships between an entity or item and other things that you find there. And then Listeria, I think you've done some Listeria work here too. So this is a great way for a lot of the projects to create task lists. So when someone wants to contribute to improving stuff but doesn't know all these tools, you can actually create task lists that give people prompts to fix a red link or to improve a property. And we'll show you some of those examples. Okay, so some examples of wiki projects that are very active. I think, Mike, you're active in astronomy and telescopes somewhat. So Mike here is really well known for building a lot of the telescope related content in Wikidata and Wikipedia. Wiki Project Cultural Heritage is also a good starting place to see some things that have been done well. And then most of you know that Wikidata Project Chat is a place where a lot of these things are discussed. If you're a Facebook user, there is a Facebook group that's pretty friendly called the Wikidata Community, where you can ask advanced or basic questions and people will probably be quite friendly in helping out there. So let's take a look at some wiki projects. This is probably one of the better ones that you see out there. So Wiki Project Visual Arts. And well done wiki projects, which there are not a lot of, but when you do find them, hopefully they will have something that describes the most desired item structures that are there, right? So they will say, if you're adding a piece of art, try to make sure you set these properties. right? These are the ones that folks who are involved with the project have found are the ones that are used the most and are modeled the best. And then this one, for example, gives you a very nice table showing you how they're used. And you can see what some of these things look like. If you go to visual arts item structure inside, you will see they give you some examples here of like watercolor painting. You should set discipline, watercolor. The type of profession is watercolorist, which I never knew. Like, I didn't know there's a watercolorist as a profession, but there you are. So this is really useful. Rather than trying to search through Wikidata to figure out what should I call the person who makes watercolors, it actually has all this. And you can see that it actually has, with those little icons there, a link to, I think that gear is Reasonator. Is that right? Yeah. And then the squid-looking thing is Squid. So it allows you to jump out and explore even more by looking at the Reasonator and Squid entries for those things. Okay, so this is an example of subclass work of art, discipline, profession, and then in a series or set, you can kind of define whether that painting is in different kind of collections or sets of things. So this is a good place to start, especially if you want to make a new project. You can kind of base your new wiki project on what you see in this one. So reporting tools for Wikidata. So Listeria you've used already. This is used quite a bit in a lot of the projects that are very active, at least on English Wikipedia. So I thought I'd show you an example of how this is used in a project called Wiki Women in Red, which has become quite active in English Wikipedia. So this is just an example of what that, kind of Listeria list would look like. If you've done it before, you just kind of know that this is the part that mostly changes here is the Sparkle query and then what columns you come back with. So let me show you how Women in Red has used this. So again, this project is to help give people a gigantic page full of red links kind of staring at you saying, please help, because we need more women biographies. And it generates these reports on a regular basis. I think on a weekly basis, they try to refresh those. And yeah, it has a lot of cool things that come back. So not only do they create one list, they create probably a few hundred lists every week. And they break this down by occupation. So this is an even better way for folks to go in and say, well, I want to help, but I only know stuff about sculptors. Well, perfect. We actually have a list made just of sculptors. It's a Listeria list that just generates all the folks who are missing in Wikidata and are sculptors. Right? So let's show you what this looks like live. Okay, so let's go to the top here. So this is the Wiki Women in Red work lists index. And you can actually go and drill down by occupation, by nationality. So let's go to nationality, and let's go to Brazil and see what this looks like here. Okay, so you can see that these are all, regardless of occupations, just show me all the folks who are listed as a nationality Brazil, but don't have an article. Okay, and you can see that, something like this one, Abigail Parasis here, doesn't have a description, doesn't have date of birth. So this one probably might not be very notable, right? But my contention would be that if you look through this list and there's a picture, there's a birth date and a death date, this person probably should have an article, or is a very good candidate for having an article, right? So nice thing is you can actually sort these, right? These are sortable tables. So you can actually sort by, what you find here, or you can just make sure that if it has an image, let's put that at the top of the list. And then I can scroll down here and say, oh, I know that person. I know that they're the politician, they're born that, and then I can go ahead and click on that red link and create that item, right? So this is how the Women in Red project has been quite successful in just giving what we call low-hanging fruit, very easy ways to engage with the content. And the people who participate don't have to know how to do a Wikidata query. They don't even have to know anything about Wikidata, that these are lists just generated out of Wikidata. Does that make sense to folks? So you might want to do something similar for projects that you have in mind, is just create very easy ways for people to engage and to fill in missing parts of content. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some other ones. Okay, so that's what I just showed you there in terms of art historians, art critics. All right, info boxes. I don't know if we want to get into this because this is a whole other topic on its own. But we're going to have a whole session at Wikimania talking about info boxes and kind of their future within our Wikipedia community. So just know that the whole topic of info boxes in Wikipedia on its own, regardless of Wikidata, is also very contentious. So I don't know if is that the case in Portuguese Wikipedia too? Even before Wikidata, info boxes are a little bit controversial. Yeah, okay, good. So at least in English Wikipedia, the biggest fights were over opera. So you had a lot of folks who liked editing opera articles, but were offended by info boxes that tried to simplify a opera into a box. So already before Wikidata, there was already info box wars over opera. So you can imagine adding Wikidata to the mix just made things even more odd. So anyway, just know that there are issues around Wikidata being the generator of info boxes or any kind of content within Wikipedia editions. And there's a big culture clash right now, whether people in Wikipedia feel that this should be centralized in Wikidata and that Wikidata should be driving content in Wikipedia. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about sum of all paintings and this issue of depicts properties. Right? So sum of all paintings, how many people have seen this project before? Sum of all paintings, okay, good. So some of you have not. This is a pretty ambitious project, saying have an item for every notable painting in the world. And the idea is to help identify high-impact, high-traffic entries in Wikidata that need improvement. So a lot of the work lists that they have in Sum of All Paintings are trying to say, hey, this painting is used in 20 languages and it's missing some very crucial things. The most high-value stuff you can do for our project is to help repair these problems in very notable artworks that are used a lot in our Wikimedia universe. So if you go to Wikidata Wiki Project Sum of All Paintings, you will see something like this. There are task lists that say, hey, help bring these lists down to 0. So let me show you what this looks like in real life. Okay, so let's go back up to Sum of All Paintings. Here's what it is. It's been spearheaded by a Dutch Wikimedian called Martin Dammers, who's worked a lot with museums and galleries in Netherlands. But he basically said, hey, you know, if we've got Wikidata and we've got Wikimedia Commons, why don't we put the two together and say, let's describe every single painting in the world that's significant. So these are lists that are generated from that. And you can see that the ones that are kind of calls to action, trying to help guide people to most productive things you can do, are top missing properties by number of site links. So if I go here, you will see that this is pretty good. This is a list that's very short now. When the project started, there were lots of paintings here that were used by 10 or 15 different Wikipedia editions that were missing very critical information. But you can see here that there is one painting that has no description in English, no creator, but used in Commons, German, and Russian Wikipedia right now. Let's take a quick look and see what this is. Babenberg Family Tree Triptych. Right, so that is pretty complex if we take a look at that. I do not want to write the depicts property for this thing. So you can see that's pretty complex. And right now, the labels exist in just German and Russian. If I open that up, all entered languages right there. Oh, and actually, it's been updated. So that list might be a little bit stale. So someone has entered it in English. And I'll have to look into when this is. Oh, yeah, this is updated sometime last year. So a lot of these things have been fixed. Right? So we want to make sure these lists are down to 0. And let me show you another one, which is the one I think is more interesting here. So this is a list where all these boxes here were empty maybe about a year ago, but now they've very much been filled in. And these are paintings that are used in lots of sites but had no depicts properties, right? Didn't describe in the Wikidata item what was actually in the painting. So you can see that some of these are very well described, some still are quite bare, right? This Virgil's tomb just shows cloud, tomb, tree, and stairs. Let's go ahead and bring that up and show you what that looks like. So this is the painting that is here. So that Wikidata item basically is trying to describe what is depicted in this artwork here. So it doesn't have rocks, for example, in the depicts property, right? So right now it just says cloud, tomb, tree, and stairs, and it's used in 18 different languages there. But then some of the other ones are a little bit better. So this is one that I did with my students at one point, which is a pretty famous painting. You might not recognize it from the name, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. So probably most people have seen this before by Renoir. So lots of stuff going on here, right? So lots of things on the table. And then if you read the Wikipedia article about this, you will see that it's very well described who these individuals are. So these are a lot of friends of Renoir, so not just guy in a hat. This is the actual person. So you will see that, in fact, these names of people are specific people in that painting and actually have Wikidata items. So you're actually pointing to individuals there in this. So this is a pretty well described one, but you could probably still do a lot. Like all the information about things on the table are not modeled completely in the depicts property here. So again, in the afternoon, we love for folks to kind of explore how are these depicts properties being used right now? Are they consistent, inconsistent? What percentage of Impressionist paintings are using depicts properties? Like which, I guess, which era of paintings use the most depicts properties? So are Renaissance paintings using depicts a lot? Are Impressionists using it a lot? So it'd be kind of interesting to run some stats in the afternoon. And since you folks are familiar with queries and how to do that, it'd be nice to find out some stats about how these things are being used. So that's kind of one of the challenges we have in the afternoon. All right, so again, some examples of the depicts properties there, P180. Right, and then this is an example that we worked with with the Smithsonian. And one of the challenges of depicts properties, right? If you know something about arms and armament, you probably know whether something is a sword or a saber or a scabbard or a foil. I don't. I only know things as a sword. But if you know art history really well, you might describe this in more detail. Like, you know, what kind of lance is that? So, right, this long stick here is known as a lance, but you might have different types of lances from different eras. Is this just a helmet, or is it a specific type of helmet? So these are all questions that are kind of open-ended right now. We don't know exactly what are the best ways to model all these things for these types of artworks. And then how many people here, have you talked about structured data on Commons a little bit? Right, so you can probably see the real excitement around the depicts properties. So anyone who's ever worked with Wikimedia Commons, which is our repository for multimedia, you know that it's kind of a nice big pile of stuff. And we happen to have some categorization that kind of works, but it's not language neutral, right? So the categories that we have in Wikimedia Commons is specifically for a type of language, right? So here are some examples of portraits that I uploaded. These are portraits that I took. And you can see what categories do I put them in. I put it in portraits by Andrew Lee and then 2018 Pulitzer Prizes. But if you didn't speak English, there's no way you could find this, right? Because you'd have to know to look for portraits. You'd have to know how to look for Pulitzer Prizes, you know, and all these things. So what we really want in Commons is a kind of a language neutral or language agnostic way of identifying what metadata we have about paintings, and Wikidata provides us that possibility, right? So structured data on Commons is this project that is now fully, I wouldn't say fully funded, but well funded. Nothing's ever fully funded in our movement, but it's well funded right now with about, I think, 3 to 4 full-time staff just thinking about how can we use what we now know about Wikidata to help add meaningful metadata to our multimedia repository. Right. So structured data on Commons, sometimes just called SDOC or SDC, is going on right now, and they hope to show us some examples of what they can do. And if you want to see a talk about this, if you load up my presentation, you can hit the play button. And this was a presentation done at the end of last year talking about what their plans are for trying to add rich metadata for multimedia content. All right, so what are some of the best ways to inspect ontologies? Well, I'm going to walk you through one example that we did with firearms and ammunition, for example. So the SQUID tool is really nice for doing this because it can give you a lot of info about instances and subclasses, right? So here's an example of where I just looked at the word cartridge. So I don't know if this is the same or different in Portuguese, but the cartridge is basically what you see as the shell and the bullet that's inside, right? So it's the casing, the gunpowder that's inside, and then the bullet. So that's what we call a cartridge. It's kind of 3 parts there. But that's basically what you talk about when you talk about whether something is a bullet made for the military or for civilian use, or it's a cannon or something like that. So generically, this cartridge is the center of a lot of the models around firearms in Wikidata or any kind of database you have. So what you like to see here are what are the typical properties you see. And what Squid can do is when you load up cartridge, it says, okay, what are all these subclasses of cartridges? And it looks around and says, okay, these are the properties we see most used by cartridge or subclasses of cartridge. Designed by, manufacturer, country of origin, commons category, these type of things, or image, right? So this is great. This does a lot of work for you. Just by loading up the Squid page on cartridge, it does this Wikidata query, finds out typically what are the properties used for anything that is a cartridge or a subclass of cartridge. Okay. Then it also tells you something interesting, the direct instances of cartridge. So here it says there's 320 direct instances of cartridges. Okay, and it's nice, it just gives you some stats about how many people have said this is an instance of cartridge. And then down below, it tells you some information about superclasses and subclasses, right? So what is above cartridges? So cartridge is a subclass of product of ammunition. And then what kind of Q numbers are subclasses of cartridge? So you can see a rifle cartridge, revolver cartridge, cannon cartridge, shotgun shell, right? So this is showing you that it's probably pretty good right now, but there could still be some improvements here, okay? Does everyone see this so far? So if you just bring up cartridge in Squid, you'll see this. Let me show you that live. Sometimes it helps to show you live because it does take some time for all this stuff to trickle in. Okay, so I type in cartridge. You can see here, type of ammunition packaging. So I click on that. Okay, again, the blue line is marching through there. Fortunately, I think it's going to come back pretty quick with this. So it's doing a lot of this processing here. So similar to what we saw before, you can see that this is the most up-to-date content. And you can see that some things have changed. Remember, we saw all instances was like 320. Now it's down to 166, right? So this is an example of where in our cleanup, we moved a lot of things that are instances of a cartridge to instances of subclasses of that cartridge. And then before we saw rifle, pistol, revolver, and shotgun shell, but now we have other subclasses of cartridge, a cannon cartridge, and then some of these are kind of more specialized type of cartridges that are there. And then all subclasses, 453. So a lot of subclasses of this. Let me see what we have here. So before we had 241, and then now after some cleanup, we now have 453, where we move things around. Okay, so let's show you what else we can do with this. Okay, so one of the things that we did with this cleanup is that numerous instances of cartridges were actually errors. So what we like to say is that we want all these different types of cartridges, so like 9mm or 7mm cartridges, all things that you might have heard of in the past, we want them as subclasses of cartridges and not instances of cartridges. So that's where we move around a lot of stuff. So that's why we moved from like 310 instances down to about 100 or so instances there. And we try to move a lot of these things that were instances of cartridges into subclasses of these different types of cartridges. But there's still a lot of fixes that we need here. Okay. Another benefit of Squid is that you can get a report on how properties are being used. All right, so this is this URL. If you click on it from this page here, and I think I noted here, this is not live, it's updated monthly because this is a lot of work, right? So you can see that these are the most used properties in Wikidata. And you can see that taxon is used quite a bit, disambiguation page, but you can see as you go down, a lot of this is to do with biology and mapping, right? So places and what we kind of see with wiki species, things like that. Okay, so you can explore a lot of things here with this property browser for Squid here. Yes, any questions so far? Okay, we'll kind of show you some more specifics. I know it's a little bit hard to understand what we're doing here to move things around, but we can show you some examples. Okay, so this is typical of what we were finding when we were looking through a lot of these different types of ammunition or cartridges in Wikidata that sometimes people didn't know whether it was an instance or a subclass. Let's do both and add them both. Not the right way to do things, but sometimes you'll see this in Wikidata, that when you're not sure, you just over add things to a Wikidata item, hoping someone will clean it up later. So that's what we were doing with this editathon, where we worked on this, right? So in this case, 25 ACP is kind of a small bullet. It's for like a tiny gun. And what we like to say is our model says that this 25 ACP, which is a type of cartridge, is not an instance of a cartridge. It's a subclass of a cartridge, right? But if there was a specific bullet that was shot and killed someone significant, then that exact bullet would be an instance of a cartridge or a bullet, right? So I think in Wikidata, you actually do have some instances of bullets, like the bullet that killed Abraham Lincoln is actually in a museum under glass. So that actually is an instance of a bullet. But most every other bullet in Wikidata should be a subclass because it's a kind of bullet. It's not the exact bullet that did something, right? So what we try to do with the cleanup here is to say any kind of instance of pistol cartridge should probably be removed and instead move to subclass of pistol cartridge, right? So you can do this with a query. I think you can do it with PET scan as well, right? You could probably go through PET scan and find all these things and then act on that afterwards. So there are multiple ways of sifting through, finding erroneous things, bringing to a tool, and then reinserting them with the other property that you want, okay? So a lot of this was done by hand when we did this, but a lot of it was done with quick statements, just downloading all these things and then writing quick statements that said subtract the instance of pistol cartridge and then add the subclass of pistol cartridge, like that. All right, so spreadsheet tools. So this is a really cool way to clean up stuff, especially for editathons, and we're increasingly using this for editathons. And it's a really nice add-on, and I don't even know who wrote this add-on, to Google Sheets. So if you've ever been to Google Spreadsheets, you know that you can actually download things that extend the functionality of Google Spreadsheets. So if you go to the add-ons menu in Google Spreadsheets, you'll notice that there's a get add-ons ... option. When you go there, you'll have this big menu of different type of add-ons. And if you just type in Wikidata, I think there's only one add-on that's related to Wikidata. You will get this nice tool. It says Wikipedia and Wikidata tools. You hit install, and then anytime you bring up Google Sheets, you will now have Wikipedia and Wikidata tools as an option there. All right, pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is show you how this works. So we created this tool, and don't worry about all the colors and everything, I'll explain it in a second, that helps us work on about 40 to 50 articles together at an editathon. And what did we do here? Well, what we did was we put in here the article name. So these are all biographies of women in science, technology, engineering, and math. That's what we're doing here. This is at the Smithsonian Institution. So we said instead of just having a list and saying, oh, you do this woman, you do that woman, and then after 2 hours we'll see what happened. We said, well, we'd like to kind of, as we do this, see the live updates to what's happening here. So what we did was we said, we're going to go ahead, and we started the day, it was just this one column. We had the list of women we wanted to work on. And then what's cool about this, if you know anything about spreadsheets, as I move my pointer or my cell over here, you will see that this is the formula that I have here. And what it does is it just says, show me the wiki revision ID of A2, which is this. So what this does is this is actually making an API call out to Wikidata and says to Wikidata, I'm sorry, this is a Wikipedia call. It says, Annie Montague Alexander, tell me the latest revision ID of that page on English Wikipedia. And it comes back with this number right there. All right, so let's just prove this is the case. So if I'm going here and I go to Wikipedia, whoops. Oh, sorry, I'm using a foreign keyboard here. Okay, so Annie Montague Alexander, if I click on this, this is her Wikipedia page. And then I can either go to view history or I can just say here, permanent link. Does everyone see that right there? I click on permanent link and it will show me this number up there. So this is a unique number that identifies this revision of the page, right? I hope this matches. Yep, so you can see that is the number that comes back from that API call. Pretty cool, right? So even if you know coding, and I'm a computer science guy, I know how to code, I much prefer this. No typos, no crazy, syntax for writing code. I really like this. And then there's a tool. Did you talk about Auras or RevScore at all? I don't know if you talked about this much. But in English language, at least, this is pretty well done. They're trying to move this out to more languages. But there is a machine learning AI tool called Auras, ORES, I think it's called. It stands for Objective Revision something score, editing score, Objective Revision Score. It's pretty cool. What it does is it's been trained by folks rating articles over a long time. And what it does, it tries to guess at the quality of the article through AI. And if you look at it, it's a pretty good guess. So it's a C-level article. So it's not a start, it's not a stub, kind of a C-level article. If we take a look at the article, it's not a bad guess. It's not very long. It has some references. It's pretty good. But it probably could be longer. So it's guessing that's a C-class article. So for our purposes for an editathon, that's really useful. Like without me having to even look at the article, the AI from the Objective Revision Scoring system comes back and says, we guess this is a C article. But that's pretty cool because it gives us a kind of a basic idea of what it is. And then what I have here is it just creates a link to that specific revision if people want to inspect that. Now here comes the really cool part. So what you can do is you can actually find the Q number for that person, right? So this is one of the functions that I've extended, and I'll show you an example of this, but basically there is a function that says, give me the Wikidata QID number. So what it does is it goes out, grabs this English language title, looks it up in Wikidata, and comes back with a Q number. Now this has to be a match. I mean, it has to be an exact match, so which is kind of tough. And it has to be the exact match of the English language title in Wikidata, not an alias, not the label. It has to be a match for the name. So I know for English language, we might have Jane Smith, braces or parentheses, pianist or something like that. So it has to match that exactly. So this label that you have here, or the article name here, has to really be an exact match. So you might have to put something at the end of it to make it unique. But this is really cool. Just by looking it up, you get the Q number. You have a link to that Wikidata item. And then this is where it's really cool. You can actually go and get the description from Wikidata based on the Q number. Right? So you can see the formula here is Wikidata descriptions of this Q number, and it comes back with philanthropist. Let's just make sure that's the case. So I'm looking here at Annie Montague Alexander. If I go to Wikidata item right here, you will see that philanthropist. So it's basically grabbed this description and plopped it right here in my sheet. That's pretty cool. So this is great for editathons because our participants don't need to know much or anything about Wikidata. It's grabbing this stuff back. Okay. And then what I like to do with this, and this kind of shows you the power now of cleaning things up. What if I said philanthropist is too vague? It should be like American philanthropist or American woman philanthropist. So I can go ahead and type in here as my new desired description. I can go in here and say American philanthropist, like that. And look at my little formula here. It's actually created a quick statement to fix that right there. So what I did was I put in my new label that I want. And if anyone's used quick statements, you know that Magnus has made D, right, the description, and then the language code after it, that. And what I've done with this formula is I just said, take this QID here, take this column heading here, slap on this thing in quotes, and I've got the quick statement ready to copy paste. That's really nice and fast, right? When what I can do is have everyone else help fix these things. Like this one has no label, so I say American marine ecologist, and that's the quick statement for that. And after about 30 minutes, I tell people with a little sprint, I say, okay, 30 minutes, you're going to go look and let's update all the labels. People fill in all the labels. And then in one magic swoop, I just copy this whole column, paste it into quick statements, boom, I fixed all the labels in one shot. So it's kind of neat, right? So there is no real defined workflow for this, but the reason why I like this is it gives you a lot of neat little tools, and you can decide at an editathon or editing session or even just at home how you want to use it. But I like this because it allows you to just concentrate on the content and not have to worry about all the structuring of the pipe character and double quotes and all that stuff. All you need to do is take the spreadsheet, fill in all the desired labels that you want. It'll generate the quick statements, and you can actually just copy this whole column, paste it into quick statements, and then boom, it fixes all those things in one shot. Right? So this is how you can clean up a lot of things very quickly. So this is just for cleaning up the description, but you can make this same kind of quick statement fix for things like occupation, for subclasses, for birth dates, all kinds of things. So we actually have some spreadsheets here. You can see we're going really deep here in terms of changing the occupation. You can actually change the occupation and make a quick statement based on the occupation. Right. So once you've built out one spreadsheet like this, we have a lot of folks who have taken this spreadsheet and copied it and used it for other editathons or just for their own private projects. Right. Okay. So the key to all this is doing the add-ons, get add-ons, right? And then you type in Wikidata right there. And then make sure you add this tool to Google Spreadsheets. And you just need to do this once. After you enable it for your Google Docs, anytime you open a spreadsheet, all these functions are available to you. And then I made some helper functions that try to give you some more easy to use things. So like, for example, this ORAS rating here doesn't exist because it's not really a Wikidata tool. So I just created a basic function that calls ORAS and gives you back a score. And then I color-coded the cell, so it changes the color based on what comes back as the score, which is kind of cool, right? So if you want that, I think I have a pointer to the spreadsheet, so you can just go in there. You can just go into Tools, Script Editor, and the script that's there, you can just copy this and paste it and use it as you like. I need to do some better documentation about this, but you know, this gives you the Rev ID given an article. This gives you the Rev score right there. And then this one gives you a QID, or it gives you a blank, like a null back. Because the problem right now, if you try to get the QID and it's missing, you get kind of an error message on the screen, which looks really ugly. So this is just a wrapper function that says, give me the QID, but if you don't find a QID, just return blank. And it looks better on your cell rather than having error on your script in your cell there. Okay. So that's just an example of what you can do with this tool. Now, but wait, there's more. So once you have all this information, I made an analysis tab here. And the cool thing is here, it makes this fancy little graph that says, hey, you know what? The majority of the content here is C class. We have no featured, but we do have 3 that are good articles. Right? So this is sometimes very useful if we're having the Smithsonian host us. Just by putting the names in there and doing this, within 10, 15 minutes, we can show the hosts and the curators, this is kind of the snapshot of where we are with these folks. That we have majority of the folks kind of in the C or start class. We have a few that are really good, right? So this is kind of a nice just basic stats sheet that you find just based on the color of the cells that you find here. All right, any questions? Can people see some use for this perhaps in either editathons or just working on your own data set? I think it's really quite useful.
Okay, I have a question, and just one thing. People who want to ask questions, they need to call me because I need to give them the microphones.
Oh, yeah.
And why does it need catch? I know that's pretty cool, but why can't you have it catch the alias? I wasn't sure I understood.
Why can't you have it? I'm sorry.
The alias, the also known as.
Right.
Why wouldn't?
You might be able to. I think even within the last 6 months, more functions have been added to the Wikidata tools. So there may be a way to do that. Right now, the function I use has to be a perfect match against the title of the article. So, for example, if I'm here, it doesn't match this. It doesn't match the, well, there's no aliases here, but it has to match all the way to the bottom. It has to match this right there, exactly. But there may be a way to kind of search the aliases or the label. But at the time I was doing this, it didn't have a function that did that. But I did notice that if you go now, and this is a good way to show you this, you can go to show documentation. This is the best way to learn it because there really is no tutorial about this right now. But if you go here, these are all the different functions that you have. Some of these are Wikidata specific, some of these are Wikipedia specific. But you can actually, one of the more fun ones to play with is articles around. So you can actually say, you know, articles around this person or this location, and then like, I can't remember what the measure is it kilometers or something like that, and give it a number, and it'll show you in a cell, you know, or give you back all the locations or things that have geocoordinates within that radius of that item, which is kind of neat. So even since last year when I did this talk, there's been a lot more added here. Yeah. Yeah, so play with it. I think there's a lot I haven't even discovered there. All right. I mean, it's also another good time to ask folks about what kind of functions would be useful to add to this. So I've added some more functions here, but I think certainly one of the more confusing things is if this article matches a disambiguation page, this doesn't really tell you right now. So this right now hopefully matches a long article about this person, but sometimes it hits a disambiguation page, and then the Aura says, oh, that's a really good disambiguation page. It's a good article. Nah, I don't care if it's a good disambiguation page. You know? So yeah, we need some more work on returning, like, what kind of page is that? Is it a disambiguation page? Is it a real page that's there? Yeah. Okay, so that is the spreadsheet tools, and you might find that useful in the afternoon if you're looking at large chunks of content there. All right. Okay, so there's some examples of the tools that you have there. And there's also a link to the extra functions that I created. If you want to find those, it's also on my Wikipedia account where you can find those as well. Okay, so live tools. How many people here have used Wikidata Graph Builder before? No, not that many. So this is really fun. It can also bring your computer to a crunching halt. So beware, because it uses a very popular JavaScript graphics library called D3. So some of you might have heard of this. Very robust, very popular. But depending on what query you do, it could bring back like 100,000 nodes all dancing around your screen. So unless you have a very powerful computer, it could really just start crunching your computer to a halt. So kind of be careful about how much you return and display. But in general, it's really cool what can come back. So let me show you some examples for this. So this is still using that example of the cartridge. So let's go ahead and run the Wikidata Graph Builder here. And let me just show you some basic examples. So this is the popular one here, showing you all parent taxons of blue whale. Right? So this is typical of what Wikidata Graph Builder will bring back, just kind of showing you all the relationships it finds based off of the blue whale as the root item, and then finding the parent taxon. Right? And the nice thing about this is you can drag things around, which is just fun on its own. You can rearrange stuff so it's easier to read, because they're not always, going to look good in two-dimensional form there, but you can kind of move it around. So you can see a blue whale, and then how the whole taxonomy tree looks like there, which is really neat. All right. Cool. And then you can freeform enter these things as well. I mean, it does check against the Wikidata items and the vocabulary that Wikidata has, but you can build your own thing. So I definitely recommend you try out some of the examples, because they kind of show some neat things that you can do. This is a kind of neat tool, too. It just kind of says, show me an item, which is an American state, and then it also has as Wikidata content, like what states it's next to. So then it just says, with this query, it says, show me the item, and then show me, all the things that it's next to, and then you come back with that visualization. Let me show you it again. And then it kind of just by, I don't want to say accident, but just because of this adjacency, it can kind of give you a rough map of the United States simply by showing that if this node is next to this node, next to this node, it's going to have to shake out like this. So it kind of looks like the US. As you can see, like this is the Northeast, and this is California and Arizona down here. This is Texas. And it's not doing it based on any geolocation. It's just that if this state is next to that one, I graph it, it kind of shakes out this way. Right? Another one that's kind of interesting is this one. So it's kind of showing a family tree. Right, the child of a child of a child of a child of a child. So what is this, the Russian monarchy? I don't know what this is, but just showing you how long the family tree is for this person here. Okay, so the nice thing about this is you can enter whatever you want, right? But that's the danger too. It can come back with a lot of stuff. So let's show you what I did when I was inspecting the cartridge thing. So I said, let me get my pointer out of there. So I said, let's start with cartridge and show all the subclasses and see what that brings us. So I'm going to say reverse cartridge subclass of. So I'm going to say reverse. And then not ROM cartridge, but ammunition cartridge here. And then I'm going to use the subclass of property to look at that. I'm not going to put any limits on it. I hope it's not going to blow up. Okay, so you can see a lot of stuff is coming back. And then D3, the graphings package, needs to kind of move it into a way that's more readable. But you can see, And if you click on it, obviously it will go to that item there, which is kind of nice. So this is a great way to kind of look at the overall structure of a whole class of what's going on in Wikidata here. So this is much better than it used to be. At least we have little blooms or clusters here. When I first started working on this, it was cartridge and then like 10,000 things on the outside. And we don't generally like to see that. When you want to try to come up with a robust ontology, you kind of want to see that there's cartridge and then there's like 7 subclasses of that. And then each of those has maybe 50 subclasses and then so on and so on. So you'd like to see like spoke, wheel, different spokes as they grow out like that, like hierarchies. So you can see that we're starting to get there. This is still not perfect, but you can see that the kind of subclasses we saw before in Squid, like pistol cartridge, you see right there. If you look at, I think this is probably rifle cartridge, right? So rifles have been around much longer in history, right? Long guns like that. There are more of them. That's why there are more rifle cartridges, which is why there's a bigger bloom that's there. Handguns, or guns you carry in your hand, are more have more technology in them in terms of making them small, metal parts, more reliable. So there are fewer handgun cartridges, but you see that there are still quite a number of them. And in fact, they kind of exist over here, pistol cartridges. Okay, does that make sense to folks? So one of the things that I will do a lot in ontology cleanup is simply to go through here and find out anything that doesn't have a label. Right, so a lot of these now, it's hard to find anything that's just Q blah, 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 because I spent a lot of time fixing these. But it used to be that if you go through here, they would just be something with Q57342. I'm like, well, if it's significant enough to be in Wikidata and in this tree, it should have an English language label, right? So a lot of times I'll just go in here and just zoom in and move around and find anything that doesn't have a label in your language that you're browsing it in, because you can browse it in any language you want. Let's go ahead and, for fun, just do that. And you can see a lot of these just are Q numbers, right? And they need Portuguese labels on these. Wow, most of them need Portuguese labels. Is there anything that has a label there? Cartuco has it. But wow, yeah, even like, okay, let's look at some basic cartridges like 9mm. Like that's a very popular cartridge. Let's see. 9mm cartridge, that's a Browning. Here, this is, no, 9mm. Oh, so hard to find. Okay, let's see. There we go. So this is one of the most popular cartridges in the world. Hopefully it has a description in every language. Portuguese, yes, it does. So that's one of the ones that does, but a lot of them don't, right? So you can see there's a lot of stuff you can do in an editathon with a military history or something that you can just add labels to a lot of these things, right? So what I would do is just go ahead and click on this, and then say, oh, and then just either copy and paste this over. But even Magnus and I were talking the other day about how you can just auto-populate a lot of this stuff because it's not going to change. A lot of these labels are just going to be the same in Portuguese as English. So we should just have a bot that just at least auto-generates something that makes sense, right? Especially since most of these labels have to do with math, like dimensions and a brand name. They're not going to be translated into another language necessarily. So yeah, this is a great starting point for a lot of the tasks here. So you do have some that have a label, but many don't here, right? So this is a good, how would you determine in one shot how well labels are translated into Portuguese if you didn't have this view, right? So just looking at this, you're like, whoa, probably only 10% have a label here. So a lot of work to do in Portuguese. Let's see French, just as an example. So French is a little bit better. We see more labels in French, but still a lot missing, right? It probably helps that Americans are gun nuts. That's probably why all those labels are in English already, right? I'm not a gun nut, by the way. I just found it interesting to use this as a case. But you can see that a lot more are filled in the French language there. Okay, good. Any questions? Okay, so you need a fairly modern computer to operate with this in a robust way, but this is pretty good. I mean, most computers can handle this. If you're returning like 1,000 or 2,000 records, then it might get a little bit more slow to deal with this. Okay, so often what I'll do is just have this graph up here and just click on items here, go edit them, and then come back here and just keep working through a whole branch of the tree that way. Okay, so that's one way to work through the ontology. Okay, so the one thing that's kind of confusing is reverse versus forward. You don't always think of subclasses and things like that as reverse versus forward, but you can see that since I put reverse, it basically says here's cartridge and then everything that's derived from cartridge. That's what it means by reverse that way. Okay, what other things can you do? Well, for sculpture, this is one that is not modeled very well. So when we were doing this with art historians, we said, let's look at the class tree for sculpture, which is 860861. And we did a lot of cleanup around here. And let's do a quick examination of this in both English and Portuguese and see what we find. So let's say we're going to do reverse sculpture. Okay, so this is English. And you can see that we like to have this kind of, I don't want to call it breathing, but kind of this dynamic, structure here that has different clusters. And when I look at something like, let's say, sculpture, and everything is all together in just one big ball, sometimes I call that a dandelion. How do you say dandelion in Portuguese? Do you know? I don't. Well, we can look up Wikidata. How about that? Dandelion. Portuguese. Oh, there's no label here. Interesting. Although the dandelion has been the object of some edit wars on Wikidata, because some people think it's a specific plant, some people think it's a family of plants. Maybe it's this one? Portuguese? Is this the right word? Is that the one you know of? Okay, great. So dandelion you know of is, this is not the best picture, but it's this white fuzzy ball with all these things outside. So that's what I call really badly done taxonomy. It's just a big ball, like a dandelion ball. And you want to make sure you kind of pull it apart into subclasses and things like that, right? So when we first started on statues, it was kind of more like a dandelion ball, and we start to pull it out into different types of sections here. So one thing I would do is look through here and say, what is this Q467 there? And then you go down and you look, and wow, not much information here. So something dealing with a crucifix or a cross, and it probably need more. This is really hard to figure out. There's not even an identifier here. Someone just put this in like that. Is there a language? Oh, so Czech. I'd have to look up in Czech language to see what this is. What links here? Oh yeah, good idea. So Magna says, what links here? So let's go ahead and see what links to this thing. Constraint violations, and a whole bunch of other Wikidata items with no English language label. Czech labels. That's true, yeah. So we'd have to do some more work here, but this is not ready for lots of easy work here. We got to do some more investigation here, right? So this is an example of what this, class tree looks like for sculpture. Let's go ahead and take a look in Portuguese. Any guesses? Fingers crossed. Is it going to be more than 50% or less than 50%? Way more? You think it's going to be better than 50%? Let's see what happens. Oops. Build. Ooh, a lot of Q numbers there, yes. But not bad. Or you don't do sculptures. I mean, to be fair, when we were doing this with the head of sculptures at the Smithsonian, so she was kind of looking at this class tree and going, kind of, not really. So a lot of experts will look at it. But then she said something was very interesting. She said, even most art historians don't know much about sculpture. Like sculpture is its own little weird world in itself. So even someone who's an expert in Renaissance paintings and altarpieces don't know what art historians in sculpture do with taxonomies. So that's kind of our challenge, is that even within the same field, you have disagreement on how to work in the same topic, right? So this is a great starting point. I mean, you could even have a whole editathon just based around this tree. Honestly, you could just say, let's take a look at sculpture in Portuguese in Wikidata and say, wow, these are the most important properties, the items to get Portuguese labels for. Let's go ahead and see how many we can do in 30 minutes and sprint and see what that improvement would look like. So I think there are a lot of nice, fun things you can do around these tools for Wikidata meetups that are not just, work lists. Something visual like this could be very fun to do for a meetup. Okay. And then obviously Wikidata query. One reason why I'm showing this is that you can do things that are even more advanced than this with Wikidata query. So When you get the results back from Wikidata query, most of you look at it in a table form, right? You have rows and columns. If you have geo-coordinates, you can show a map. If you have a number in a column, you can make charts. But I don't know how many people here have ever, when you've gone to Wikidata query, and let's just do the cats, our favorite example of cats, and run that and get back. So you know that when you go do a query, you have this eyeball here. How many people here have ever used graph on this? Probably not a lot of you, right? Because by accident, you probably would never be able to do a graph that's meaningful. But like here, if you do a graph on cats, it's just going to show you all these individual cats everywhere, right? Because there's no relationship between these cats right now. But if you actually have a column in your results that points to something else in your results, it'll draw a line between them or an arrow between them, a directed graph. So you can use this to your advantage in that you can actually make a query, but then one of the things you return from the query is pointing to another QID or another item, and then it'll graph it for you in a very fancy way on this. Let me show you some examples of this, and this can help you figure out what's missing or what is done on Wikidata. So if I'm back here in my presentation, I'm going to show you an example of using Wikidata query to do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to do a Wikidata query, and I'm going to examine the class tree of cartridge. So let's go ahead and show you that. Okay, so again, this is going to put some strain on your computer because it's using the same kind of graphical library here. So this is showing you, and I'll show you the query in a second, the relationship, very similar to what we just saw in the Wikidata Graph Builder, but you have the power of Wikidata query to do more. You can show pictures, you can filter out more things or not filter stuff. So remember the Wikidata Graph Builder, you just say, starting item, relationship, show me everything, and then you really don't have very many options after that. But what you can do is after you do the Wikidata Graph Builder, do I still have one up here? You can actually bring it over to Wikidata Query Service. So if you do that, it'll take your query and then put it into Wikidata query. So let me show you what this looks like if you do something interesting. So this is the same kind of cartridge display, but it's using this query. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so it's basically saying I am looking at subclass of cartridge, right? I am also saying subclass of subclass, what is it? So what the relationship is, yeah. So then what I can do is when I hit this, let me show you the results in a table form. If I show that in a table form, you can see that what it's doing is so this is the subclass and this is the item of the subclass, right? So it can make a graph out of this, which is pretty cool. And then on top of that, you can actually turn on more options. So you can actually show images on the graph like that. Ooh, neat. If your computer can handle it, like if you're bringing up 1,000 images all dancing around your screen, just think about the computing horsepower you need for that, right? So let me show you what that looks like in practice, and I hope I don't know much about the power of this computer, but let's go test it out. So if we're on this, let's go ahead and open this up. So if you have my presentation there, you can just click on these links and they're live. So look at that. Wow. Ooh. So you're starting to see the deficiencies in some ways of images in Wikidata, and that sometimes they're really tall, sometimes they're really wide, sometimes they're square, and they're different resolutions. But this is kind of neat in that it shows you kind of like the family tree of ammunition and cartridges in a visual way, right? And you can even drag them around and reconfigure them as you need to, right? You can move this around and get things out of the way there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the query and see what it says. Okay, so the query here says, show me subclasses of cartridge. Okay, and then it uses this property you may never have used before, based on. So if the set that you're working on actually has a pretty good model where it says, this work is based on that work, which is based on that work, right? So in artwork, that happens a lot, saying that, Monet painted something that was based on this, or like for music, like the Goldberg Variations played was based on this work, based on that work. So if you have this modeled, I pull that information as this item is based on this other item, And then the optional clause you probably know from your training, right? That I want all the results, but if you happen to find a picture, give me that picture, right? And both the picture for the item and then for the based on part, then you can actually go ahead and just, that's it. That one query like that, but the key here, the default views graph, right? So it's going to not return it in table form by the default. It's going to draw the graph. That simple set of queries there, or the simple set of statements in the query there, is going to generate something cool like that. So you're welcome to take this query there, which I'm doing for firearms, which you probably don't care about, but do it for art, do it for music, do it for all kinds of different things. And I think this query is actually in the examples query when you go to Wikidata query now, if you look for that, which is kind of a useful thing, right? So you can kind of see different islands here, like these are cartridges based on one, these are cartridges based on something else. And this is a good way also to find missing images. So if you're looking through here and saying, oh, I need to find an image for this one, you can see immediately which ones are missing images as well. Okay, any questions so far? So again, you can see the common theme here is tools to give you kind of two-dimensional 10,000-foot views of Wikidata, which probably didn't really have tools to do before. It's all just query this, query that, individual items. And I think the more tools we have to look at gigantic patches of data on Wikidata, the more useful our meetups and our editing sessions can be. And then this one is a fun one as well. I think this one is already in the examples on Wikidata query as well. So this is musical genres, right? So instances of a musical genre, and then whether it's a subclass of something else. And this kind of graphs out the history of music visually through this one Wikidata query. So there are 1,343 genres as of December 2017. I can't say that this is a great mapping right now. I've talked to some music librarians who looked at it and go, kind of, but it's still imperfect, but not bad because it's a start. Right? Okay, so this is an example of music genres. And then how many people here have used Viz Query before? Anyone here use Viz Query a little bit? Unfortunately, I don't think it's multilingual. It's very English-based. But if any of you is ever, either scared or want to do a quick query and you don't want to use query.wikidata, like sometimes I'm like, I need to kind of boot up my brain to get into query.wikidata mode because it's a syntax, it's a language. But Viz Query is kind of nice sometimes if you just want to do simple queries. So it's kind of a click and add stuff. So I can go in here and say add rule, and I can say subclass of, and it just has a very nice interface here. And I can say cartridge. And those are my cartridges there. And that's it. And you can keep adding rules here. And I hit query, and then it brings up all these things. Now, it's going to limit you to 50 to start with. So don't be surprised if it says, oh, it's only 50. So it doesn't want to blow up your computer, so it's going to give you a limit to start with here. But I will sometimes start here. So instance of human brain, there's a good way to find out, was I lying when I said there's only one other human brain in Wikidata? Oh, no, not subclass. I'm sorry. What should I change this to? Instance of, correct. So again, I don't think this is multilingual, so it's all English interface. It shouldn't be that hard to do it, but Hay, this guy Hay is a English Wikipedian. So you can see there's Einstein's brain, and there's a picture of Babbage's brain right there. Yikes. So these are the only two instances of human brain, and this is just a much faster, easier way, and someone who doesn't want to learn Wikidata query can do it this way too. But if you do want to go to Wikidata query, you can by just clicking on Sparkle query, and it loads that in. A little bit uglier than you're used to seeing, but this is the same query as this, but in Sparkle form. Okay. So I like using that a lot when I'm doing quick queries. So you might see when we do things in the afternoon, I might use this instead of doing a full-blown Wikidata query. Okay, so there's Viz Query. Okay, then the two challenges. This might be a good time to present the challenges, take a little break, and then we can discuss how we want to strategize for the afternoon. So I've shown you some tools here. You've learned some tools in the previous Wikidata session. So these are kind of the two challenges I think would be interesting, and not just interesting, but really, if you come up with some meaningful results, would be really interesting to a lot of folks in our community. So these are two that come up quite a bit. Number one is part of or parent. So these are two different ways to model, and in this specific question I'm asking you is, this library, is it part of the bigger library system? Or is this library at Sao Paulo University part of University of Sao Paulo? Or is it that Sao Paulo University is the parent organization? So these two properties are P361 in English is part of, or P749 is parent organization. And we forgot to look up P749 in Portuguese. Should we do that right now? You did? What is it called? Does it make sense or not really? Right, so part of or parent. And part of this looking into this case is if you look at the original property proposal, and I don't know if you ever discussed how are properties created, like how are babies made, but how are properties created in Wikidata? It's not that simple. You actually have to go to a specific part of Wikidata and propose it and fill out, not hard, but you need to answer some tough questions, like why do you need this property? Does anything else replicate this right now? And explain that, we only have 4,000 to 5,000 properties in Wikidata. You adding another one is a big deal. So explain why you need it, how you're going to use it, give me some examples, and so it's a lot of stuff. So if you look at the property proposal, and they're all archived, so it's really nice. If you look up P361, one of the items for P361 is a pointer to the discussion on how it was created, which is very nice. And it doesn't really talk about organizations. It talks about how an engine has multiple parts, and you would put, like the cylinder or the spark plug and all this stuff would be part of an engine. So all the other examples are about kind of physical parts and things, but not about library part of a university, or not about museum as part of this bigger museum. So we're kind of using part of in a very general way on Wikidata because we just don't have as many properties that do that. Or if we know that it's what we call a parent-child relationship, or a bigger, smaller relationship, or main organization, subsidiary organization, should we just use parent organization? And you'll find out when you explore this, it's very inconsistent. And what we'd like to do is for anyone who wants to approach this task in the afternoon, we'll put you in a group, is to look at how much is this being used with the part of model and how much is being used with the parent organization model, and then maybe identify some folks who are doing it well. Right? So how are museums done? How are libraries done? How are universities doing this? And then how much work would it be to fix this model? I guess kind of estimate the amount of work. And do we want to actually just go ahead and fix the model today if we can, at least for universities or just for libraries? It's kind of interesting. I think I have a stats sheet here. Yes, so initial results, libraries, and this is just for libraries. About 2,000 libraries are saying they're part of a big organization. About 150 libraries are saying the parent organization is this. Doesn't mean this is right or wrong. It just means that this is the first exploration of libraries. But I will tell you that I looked into this for universities, and for universities, the parent organization tends to be used a lot more for certain types of entities. So part of your job for the afternoon is to figure out what does this look like in Wikidata. And this can be with a combination of queries, with the graphical tools we talked about. Yeah. So the second challenge that we have as well is what we're talking about before, is the depicts property. So anyone here interested in GLAM work with museums or art museums, this would be really interesting. As I mentioned before, we just had a new grant that was accepted by the Knight Foundation to explore some of these questions. So the big question that we gave to the Knight Foundation that we're trying to solve, and they said this is worth funding and worth asking, is how might we provide a user interface or something friendly for the user at a computer that aids in the addition of meaningful depicts properties. So not just depicts for art historians. How do you add depicts properties that are useful to as many people as possible? That's a really hard question to answer, right? Because it's really hard to answer just for like medieval art or Renaissance art. Can you think about all art? That's really tough. But at least we want to start exploring this question. So one of the big questions is, what is the state of using depicts? Like we don't even know what percentage of artwork has depicts properties right now. I think some people have some estimates, but write some queries that try to look at all artworks. How many have one depict property? How many have two? How many have three? Just generate a graph perhaps to say, which ones have What's the average number of depicts properties? Find out the artworks have the most depict properties. Are they really good ones to use as examples? How many people, or how many artworks that have depicts properties actually use the qualifiers, right? So you can actually say, this painting depicts a tree, but what is the qualifier? Located at? No, what is it called? No, if you say that something's depicted, but you want to say, if it's in a foreground or background, it's, there's a qualifier there. Yeah, but something like location in the painting. You can say whether it's foreground, background, or something else, right? So how many paintings are actually going to that level of detail to say that it has a tree that's in the background, it has a cat that's in the foreground? There are some artworks that do that, but what percentage of artworks do that? These are questions no one's really looked into yet. And this afternoon, we could actually get some meaningful data in this area. And then our big question right now is, in these 300-some thousand artworks that you see in Sum of All Paintings, or in the 48 million Wikidata items, what are some of the best ones that are modeled that we should be looking at as examples going forward? And then for both of these challenges, what are the questions that we should be asking? So these are just some basic ones, but in the process, it'd be great, even if you can't answer them, to create next level questions we should be asking or investigating that could help the next person coming along to find out more about how these are modeled in Wikidata. Okay, so I just want to leave that there. There's a lot to absorb, a lot of new tools, a lot of new questions. But I definitely want to encourage you, if you feel like the question is too big, just feel free to narrow it down to just Portuguese things, or the things in Brazilian museums, or just with, went to MASP, is it? M-A-S-P yesterday? Or just paintings that are found there. Just do some exploration of a smaller set first if you would just want to try that out. That would be very useful as well. Don't feel like you need to process all 300,000 artworks this afternoon. It's a lot to process. But if you know Wikidata query, it shouldn't be that hard to say, let's do a graph of, how many artworks have one depict statement, how many have two depict statements, how many have three depict statements. To my knowledge, that hasn't really been done in any meaningful way. Good. So I'll pause here for any questions or comments or any kind of things that we might want to demo more of that might be useful for the afternoon. Okay.
Questions?
Yes, the question over there. You have to use the microphone.
Just a comment. Cecilia is a skilled audio descriptor for a blind organization that helps blind people here in Brazil.
Right.
So these qualifiers that I must confess that I don't know properly for the depicts properties should be very useful to understand in a way that blind people could properly understand what a painting, for instance, can depict.
That's a great point. And one of the big questions we also have that I didn't put down here is that we as Wikimedians don't even know the best practices in the art world for describing them. And then if we can learn from other domains, especially for blind, if they have a whole taxonomy of ways to describe artwork to blind folks, that would be very useful for us to know about, so we can align some of the things that we're doing with adding metadata to existing metadata standards that work and have been created by experts. That's a great point. Any other questions? Or I'm also open to other challenges. So these are like two ideas that we had that we think almost anyone in the room could meaningfully take up as their afternoon task and provide very useful results for both these projects of how do libraries and museums figure out how to model organizations, things like that. How do you do the depicts properties? But if you see anything that we covered here, whether it's with musical genres or with the cartridge thing or anything that inspires you to think about a question that could be answered with some of these tools, you're welcome to let us know about something else you want to work on in the afternoon. We can help guide you in those areas. Because as long as you use these tools in some way that give some kind of insight into how to look at Wikidata in the large view, that would be a very useful project for the afternoon. Yes?
Another silly comment. I think that Wikidata item entry at the side menu on the main page, it's some kind of hidden among dozens of other entries. Why not put it together with the other Wikimedia sister projects, just like Commons on Wikicode? I think it's not just reasonable, but very fair.
Right. So you're saying instead of saying Wikidata items all the way down the bottom, put it closer to the top.
Yeah, because commons and Wicode, for instance, it's in a splitted menu on the sidebar, and Wikidata it's together.
Oh, right. In other projects, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. And it's kind of funny why it's just kind of in this gigantic random list of stuff right there.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure who we contact to change that. I mean, I'm an admin on Wikipedia English, but I wouldn't want to make that change unilaterally. But the funny thing is it makes more sense to be here, but then the problem is it becomes less visible because it's like further down the list, right?
Less Athens, perhaps more visible.
Yeah. But you're right. This completely makes sense to be in other projects right there. Is it the same thing on Portuguese or not?
It's the same thing in all wikis.
All wikis are like that? Huh,
I think that English Wikipedia, unfortunately, gave us a bad example.
So let's say if we go to Wiki. Oops, sorry. The Elemento Wikidata, right, is down there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's below Commons here. Interesting. Huh. It's really hidden on this one. I'm not even sure I've ever clicked on the In Other Projects Commons button here. I think I've always gone to the bottom of the article and see if there is this box down here. Interesting.
I think it also has the idea that Wikidata is not a Wikimedia project.
That would be that would seem like that's what they're thinking. Yeah.
You also have shortcuts. You also have shortcuts to go directly to Wikidata. Alt Control G.
Oh, interesting. Alt Control.
At any Wikipedia page, you make that shortcut. You go directly to Wikidata.
Alt Control G. Maybe not on this keyboard, but I'll have to try that.
Okay.
But what does the G stand for? Wikidata. There's no G in Wikidata.
If you press H, you go to history of the editions. If you press,
Right.
how do you say A? E? If you press E, you go to
Right.
edit page, and there, if you press S, you go to save the page, or
Right.
P.
Oh, wait,
to
Alt
preview.
Shift. So maybe on this one I have it Alt Shift G.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. I didn't know that. Good. See, that's great. The problem is I wouldn't associate G with Wikidata, so.
I use that for at Wikipedia and Wikidata, a lot of pages at the same time. So I need to go to Wikidata. I go through the keyboard, not the mouse.
That's a great hint. I would not have thought of that.
There's a list of shortcuts somewhere.
Nice. I guess if you hover it over, does it tell you? Let's see. It does. Alt Shift G. There we go. I never hovered it over it, and I never waited to hover over it. Good. Thank you. That's great. Any other questions or interesting projects that you think might benefit from some of these tools to look at big sections of Wikipedia or Wikidata, that is? Whether it's GLAM or your own projects or anything that you worked on in the past that could benefit from looking at gigantic sections of Wikidata.
One good example that we keep in a fit with this big data is the birds, for example. We have all the lists of birds that don't have photos at Wikidata, and this could highlight all those birds that are missing. But one difficulty that I have is that we don't have as Brazilian birds, but I don't know how to cross birds that appears in Brazil and birds, for example.
Interesting.
I think that's endemic too.
Endemic to, is that the property?
Sorry, I believe the property is endemic to. That should be set for, well, all organisms that live in a specific part of the world. but I think it's solely underused.
Maybe birds that migrate to Brazil can be a problem. So I don't know how to fix that, and this is a new challenge for me. It's interesting to see that.
Well, let's do a quick, that's a great question. So let's go ahead and take a look at the property browser in Squid, and then we can go ahead and filter for endemic too. I don't work a lot with the animal kingdom, so I'm not familiar with that property. So let's take a look and see. But these are the fun parts of Wikidata, right? Like going into new areas you've never looked at. So if you say endemic, I need to wait for it to come back. It's still doing a live shot in there. Oops, oh, this is slowing things down. Okay. Yeah, I'm more into the things that shoot birds, right, than that. Wikidata property endemic. There it is, P183. So if we want to do a quick query, let's go to Viz Query, just to show you some Viz Query magic. So we can say, let's look at things where something is endemic to Brazil. I'm not sure this will catch what we want, but let's go ahead and try it first. So there's, some things that come back here. Remember, it says 50, but that's only because that's my limit is 50 there. So some pictures, no pictures. We could bring it to Sparkle if we wanted to get more rows that are. Oh no, I still have the limit 50 there. $1,000 seems like that's underused as a property. We should probably have more than 1,000 things endemic to Brazil. Yeah, but that's a good project for the afternoon too. If you wanted to see, how many should be endemic to Brazil, how many are right now modeled in Wikidata, and what it would take to get you to that point.
So maybe one approach to this, one property that's actually used, I think more, is taxon range map, because there's lots of pictures of maps where species are endemic to, but it's just not entered as a Wikidata property.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could find items that have a taxon range map, but not the endemic to, and then just set that from the map.
Interesting. Yeah, so here's what he was talking about, 181, so they're very close to each other in number. Taxon range map image, and then you can see data type commons media, and then use and statements. You can see roughly how many times it's being used. So probably not extensively, but still probably might be the right thing to do. So when you bring that up in Squid, this is kind of neat, and that shows you kind of its profile within Wikidata, right? Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see. So it's being used on 16,000 some entities. It's being used for all these countries, which is good. So it looks like the granularity is country level. And then typical properties being set for folks who use that. And then qualifiers, country, start time of, interesting. And then what kind of property constraints are on that? Yeah, so one thing you could do is you could actually do a query to find out which regions are using this the most, and see who has been using this endemic to the most of all these places. Let's see what further results gives us here. So 379 different places have been listed as endemic to. I don't think it gives you any more stats about which ones are using it more. But a simple query could do that if you move it over to Wikidata query.
I was just wondering, what is endemic to Mars? It's the lowest answer on your...
Let's find out. Oops, I'm sorry. Any guesses? What is endemic to Mars? Oops.
That character of Looney Tunes, probably.
Mars. fictional taxonomies. Instance of ice warrior, fictional, yeah, that's probably what it is. So we have this problem of fictional versus nonfiction again in this area. Right? But if you do an instance of, that'll probably filter it out based on what you're looking for, right? Good. Any other questions or ideas? So I love the idea of the endemic to examining how well that is being used across different domains of Wikidata. What else? Anything else? Yeah?
Okay, then I guess it's time for the applause. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sure, sure. Upstairs, great. And we'll reassemble at 1:30, what time? It's 12 now, or almost noon. 1, okay.